Order. The question is that the amendment be disagreed to, and I call the honourable member for Warringah.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the Treasury Laws Amendment COVID-19 Economic Response Package number 2 bill. This bill makes the necessary amendments to the legislation to enable the COVID economic response package, which has been announced in the recent weeks and following the recent outbreak of COVID-19 in New South Wales and around Australia. The consequential lockdowns in New South Wales have been really hard, and a testament to that, in fact, is appearing by video link to represent the people of Warringah to Parliament. I welcome the assistance that the Commonwealth Government has provided to the businesses and individuals of New South Wales who are being greatly impacted by the current lockdown measures. But I have to say that this support doesn't go far enough. For small businesses, they have used up all their savings. People, especially small business owners, especially here in my electorate of Warringah, are at breaking point. They were locked down already during the most profitable time of the year at Christmas in the holidays, while the rest of Sydney roamed free. They're confused and distraught, with no end in sight to this lockdown and cases that continue to rise. People are really at breaking point. I feel for businesses, and I'm doing all I can to support them, to advocate for their needs. It is so important that the government hear this message loud and clear. These measures are welcome, but much more is needed. It's not enough. And I would say to the Treasurer, who I know is going to address some businesses in Warringah this evening by video link, it's not enough. You need to really listen to businesses, to listen to how they are coping, understand the cracks. Don't be too proud to think that this is all perfect. You can do better and things can be adjusted. It's important to attend open forums, to take questions and really listen to people on the ground for their experience. Many local businesses have been speaking to me, and I'm sure, like many other members of Parliament, I've been attending numerous forums over Zoom to understand their plight and make sure that the issues they're having are conveyed to the government. There are issues with the packages from the state government, but mostly with the federal government. JobSaver program, there's so much confusion, and there is a deep, bewilderment as to, for small businesses, why the government couldn't continue with the JobKeeper plan, because it was a system that they knew, they understood, and that was work. This was a success story. If you tightened up the areas of excess and where money had been wasted, this was a program that worked. But now these businesses in absolutely distraught with lockdown, facing this, all the challenges is they have to adjust to a whole nother system, and there are issues with that system. The new JobSaver program and the COVID disaster payment, they actually act as a disincentive for employees from actually working where work is available. The fact that the employees now receive a payment when there's been a reduction of hours and that payment comes directly from Service Australia means that rather than from their employer, which was what was occurring under JobKeeper, means that it's more akin to a social security payment than a wage subsidy. And what it does do is it no longer ties employees to their employers. Whereas JobKeeper did tie employees to employers together financially, this new combination of JobSaver and COVID disaster payment doesn't have the same effect. So, for example, a small business that has pivoted, that's staying afloat, for example, by serving takeaway, it still needs to pay staff directly to come in. But staff at the same time are receiving the disaster payment, and some are in fact not making themselves available to work. And so small businesses who are trying desperately to maintain their business are simply needing to meet their fixed liabilities and additionally wages, and it's simply not possible. Fixed liabilities like rent, insurance, stock, energy bills, these are things that they need assistance with, and the current structure of the program simply doesn't address it. One large hospitality venue in Warringah has estimated that they are about $70,000 a month worse off under the latest package than they were under the supports last year. before they even pay wages, which are no longer subsidised. So there really is an issue with the current structure of the package. Some of the wages, for example, they have to pay include COVID marshals and additional cleaners for improving the safety of venues. An issue also that's been raised is the hard thresholds for support. And I do agree that there needs to be evidence of reduction of turnover. We simply can't afford to see that kind of abuse of the system where businesses that have not suffered a loss take so much public funds. But I've also got the feedback from local businesses that the hard cut off of 30, 50 or 70% reductions to qualify for support is creating an uneven structure. For example, a business that has suffered 28% reduction gets nothing, and yet they are substantially in the same boat as a business who has suffered 30%. Likewise, a business with 68% reduction receives significantly less than one with 70% reduction. So I would urge the government to think about these threshold categories, because what you're creating is very uneven outcomes for businesses that are all in the same boat. A more gradual approach to tiers would be welcomed by many businesses. Another issue that's been raised with me is that basing the grants on the payroll liability alone is not it's just not an accurate reflection of the costs for a business and the challenges they are facing in staying open. For businesses that have been struggling since the beginning of the pandemic and they're operating with skeleton staff, it means that their fixed costs such as rent, power, insurance, indemnity, all those aspects are not covered in the assessment of the level of support they receive through JobSaver. So they are simply not being supported to the extent that they need. So staff wages are often only about 20% of the operating costs of a small business. So the government is essentially only assisting 40% of 20% of those costs. That's not enough. And so whilst the name of this policy of JobSaver is nice in theory, it simply won't save jobs because businesses will not be there when the lockdown finishes. So it's really important for the government to listen, for the Treasurer to listen and adjust this program to take into account the needs. The grants don't reflect all those expenses. Rental support is a major issue. So part of those fixed expenses is that rental cost. Many local businesses are calling for a return to the mandatory code of conduct for leasing that was implemented last year. And while there are concessions and incentives for landlords to provide the rental relief, and they're welcome, they're not having the desired effect. I can see from the ground from businesses here in Sydney and Warringah that are under lockdown, this is not working. They are still being met with demanding landlords, and this is just not tenable for them. Especially if landlords, for example, are benefiting from reductions and benefits from themselves and then not passing it on. That really is unconscionable. So we need, and I appreciate incentivising landlords is an approach that is preferred, but it's simply not enough at the moment. With an extended lockdown period, we have businesses here in Warringah that have been shut now for 5 weeks. We have another 3 weeks to go. On the numbers announced today, it is highly likely we will be in lockdown for some more weeks to come. Businesses will not survive. So at the moment, the only reprieve really is in the form of a deferral of rent, where their businesses are permanently suffering losses. So the landlords will get their rent back eventually, but businesses will not get their lost turnover back. So I would urge the government to consider a return to the mandatory code to make landlords come to the table, because at the moment, many are not willing to negotiate. The current New South Wales regulation only applies from the period of 13 July to 20 August. Now, ironically, the lockdown started on 26 June and will continue beyond 20 August. So National Cabinet needs to work to reconsider these timeframes. And I urge the government to redesign some of these support packages. It really needs to provide a subsidy to business owners, such as 1/3 of cost of rent payment, or 1/3 paid to the landlord and 1/3 by the tenant. There are a lot of proposals that have been put forward, and there needs to be progress on these issues. A key issue of concern is support beyond the lockdown. There's going to need to be support for a good 3 to 6 months beyond lockdown. Many industries and businesses work way in advance, and all of their bookings have been cancelled. They will not emerge with a full trading capacity at the end of this lockdown, and they need that certainty to know what will happen on the other side. At the moment, it is a deadly silence coming from government, from National Cabinet, of what happens beyond lockdown. I urge the government to deal with that, to give businesses some certainty. The events industry, for example, takes bookings 3 to 6 months in advance. They've lost all their bookings for the remainder of the year, and they won't miraculously appear again at the other side of a lockdown. And businesses like events, conferences, major sporting events, performing arts, all of these are on their knees. They've already been suffering so much since last year, since the start of the pandemic, and they really are calling for some clear policies like the COVID cancellation insurance policy to be jointly funded by the government and the industry, so that we can actually see events, that there be some confidence in people, in businesses in these industry, to be able to schedule and plan events so that if they have to be cancelled, they are covered to an extent. This includes mass participation sporting events. They bring huge value to our society. They've been decimated in the last 24 months, even outside lockdown zones, because as states shut down borders, we simply see events cancelled. We've recently seen the Port Macquarie Ironman cancelled, with millions lost to the local community, but also lost to local charities, because so much is raised throughout events like this. It really is important to understand. I have met with the members of AMPSIA, the mass participation events. I know they've met with the Minister for Trade and Tourism, and I really urge him to come up with that plan and that event cancellation policy. Travel agents, of course, have been suffering now since the beginning of this pandemic. I mean, they are still the industry with no end in sight. And that whilst under JobKeeper, they were at least had some level of subsidy while they processed cancellations, they are really now left at a loss. They need some certainty, and there needs to be further announcements from the government in relation to grants packages beyond the current round of the grant consumer travel support grants. There really needs to be more certainty. Now, in relation to individuals, I welcome the announcements of the COVID disaster response payment, but it would have been so much better if this could have been announced in a timely way at the beginning of the lockdown, so that we could see that people could know they were going to be covered and could comply. Instead, what we see is 2-3 weeks delay in announcing, people still going about with business because they fear for their ability to feed and meet their liabilities. And what we see is transmission continuing in the community. It is so important for government to provide certainty. I'm pleased the government has finally given additional support to those on job seeker and payments of those who had lost work, to especially those like students, but there are still many that aren't getting access to that. We need to make sure all those individuals in those groups are able to get support. In particular, tradies who, for example, under 18, 16, 17 may have left school, they have lost their hours of work, but they are not eligible for the support packages. So there needs to be that flexibility in the programs to ensure all of those that need help are able to receive that support. The Australian National University has found that people during the job seeker with the COVID supplement at that higher rate demonstrably were more likely to find work when the coronavirus supplement was in place, because they experienced reduced poverty and less housing stress. So if we want people in work, and we do want people to work, then we need to ensure they are appropriately supported to be able to do that. So I welcome the measures, but I do urge the government to be realistic. To save jobs, you need businesses to survive. The programs need to be tailored to ensure businesses' needs are met and that they are able to deal with it. It is a shame it is always reactionary policy that was not proactive. We have all been calling for plans and for more proactive policy in providing support. Finally, I thank everyone around the Northern Beaches for doing such an amazing job at complying with orders, the high levels of testing, but also please, please get vaccinated.